If you could go back to the start of your career and pick up a skill earlier, what would it be? It's one of those questions that's both fun and a little bit painful to think about. In today's episode, I'm talking to brand side retail media leaders who looked back and shared the skills they wish they'd developed sooner. And guess what? None of them said it was about crunching numbers or mastering spreadsheets. We'll dive into whether you can be purely left-brained as a retail media professional, the career-boosting skill of storytelling, and what the 7-38-55 rule of presentations is. Now, the common thread here is really on the softer skills and things that you may not immediately associate with retail media. If you're earlier on in your career, this is a great episode for you. And if you're a little more on the experience side, it's a great episode to share with people on your team who are earlier in their careers. Let's go. Good morning and welcome to the Retail Media Breakfast Club. I'm your host, Kiri Masters, and every weekday at 6 a.m. Eastern, I bring you candid and real discussions in the world of retail media and marketplaces in just 10 minutes. So bring your own cup of coffee and we'll get smarter about retail media together. Now let's hear from Ben Galvin, Senior Director of Omnichannel, Retail Sales, and E-commerce at Monster Energy.
A skill I wish I developed earlier in my career is storytelling with data. Early in my career, like a lot of business analysts and category leadership analysts, which how I started in my career in the beverage industry, I focused heavily on technical skills, results, but I wish I had developed that ability to craft a compelling narrative and translate those complex insights into actionable strategies for cross-functional teams. I came up through a commercial organization within the beverage industry, Anheuser-Busch, Constellation, really focused on, again, IRI and Nielsen sales metrics, sales performance, share, distribution. A lot of, they call it rich metrics that they have within the commercial side, but really that narrative is what is so creative and ultimately can influence a decision maker. And that's something that I think I'm always going to work on in my whole career, but I wish I had started to look at it a little bit more early in my career to not just focus on the, call it technical skills and results of this sales performance, but crafting the why behind the what.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions of like where to go to or who to go to build that skill, or what helped you develop that skill ultimately?
I think one of the big things to think about, especially in today's world where data is so rich as well as rampant across multiple different platforms, is don't just think of a single solitary source. And I'll give an example. So if you're running commercial sales analysis, think about not just the sales performance metrics that you're running, but think about, hey, was marketing running at the same time? And what was their reach from a standpoint of digital media? Is there panel information through Forrester or Cleveland Research that you can try to bring in? And Numerator, is there that type of overarching consumer panel information from a consumer metric? I think in today's society, a lot of consumer product goods especially have access to so many different pieces to say, all right, if I'm running analysis on this program during this time period, what else happened during this period besides the sales that I can see on my screen? How can I bring in, again, what the digital team did, the marketing team did, and overlay that? Because we don't know necessarily if seasonality came into effect or marketing turned off or on during that period. And I think that's the biggest way to think about it, is ultimately be curious. Be curious about what else happened during the sales period against the specific retailer that you're talking about. A lot of brands like to give a weather report. Oh, it rained, so we didn't sell as much. But there could be other factors that your company or your industry came into effect, and it's always something to make sure, and that helps build a better story of what happened.
Now let's hear from Paolo Bacarin Filho, Commercial Director at Tom's of Maine.
I would say storytelling and how to communicate effectively. To add some context, I tend to be pragmatic. So earlier in my career, I was laser focused on sharpening my hard skills. Things like analytics and creating PowerPoint decks. And my thinking was that being objective and fact-based were the silver bullet for landing points more effectively. But throughout my career, I learned the lesson that, guess what? How matters. And the what, still important, but how you communicate unlocks even more impact And the turning point for me was learning the 7-38-55 rule. And for those who don't know, the concept basically is what is communicated or the content is around 7% of the impact, while the tone of voice is 38% and body language is 55%. So in essence, I was putting limited focus on what drives 93% of the impact and limiting the impact of my presentations, negotiations, and leading teams by focusing on the hard skills.
Now let's hear from Ash McMullen, Head of E-commerce at Advantice Health.
Being able to take a lot of data and simplifying it into one or two key headlines. And this is something that I still very aggressively learn and practice on a weekly basis of just taking data and distilling it down to like, what is the key takeaway we really want from this?
Now let's hear from AJ Patel, SVP of Global Growth at UBeauty.
A skill I wish I developed earlier in my career is creative analysis. As a numbers guy, I always was focused on, your return on investment, looking at how your media management was performing. But one thing which is really important nowadays is that creative flywheel and understanding what's going to fuel better performing creative. And it took a while for me to develop that skill. I'm not the most creative person in the world. So understanding what nuances were driving higher customer intent when creating video assets, for example, or what is driving customer intent from a static in terms of what ways things should be positioned on a carousel, or there's a lot of different creative optimization that can be done. And it's not just black or white based upon Meta's going to identify the best creative for you, and no solution is really going to identify that for you. It takes a lot of learning, and there's a lot of art and science to it.
Yeah, and so what did you do to develop that skill?
I think it just came over time, for me at least, understanding similarities between creatives that were working really well. It just took a little bit longer of a time than other skills which I developed rather quickly, like understanding customer lifetime value and understanding key metrics along those lines. Because it's more of a soft skill metric and more qualitative than quantitative, I think sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to develop that.
Well, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Retail Media Breakfast Club. We meet here every day at 6 a.m. Eastern. So be sure to subscribe and get your daily dose of insights, trends, and hot takes in the world of retail media and marketplaces.